Can you let me in on the secret of sort of creating a killer podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. The secret to creating a killer podcast is actually incredibly simple. What you do is
Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect, an education podcast about effective strategies that teachers feel guilty using. My name is Dr. Zach Rochelle, and that voice you just heard was this episode's guest, Tracing Woodgrains. Trace is the chief of staff for Blocked and Reported, a show that bills itself as a podcast about dumb internet garbage. As someone who is unusually interested in the myths and mumbo jumbo of our dear teaching profession, I was honored that Trace was able to dig himself out of the underbelly of the internet just long enough to record this episode about his investigations pertaining to education. This episode feels a bit more journalism-y than past episodes, as we'll go through Trace's reporting on topics ranging from the Biden administration's policies surrounding student loan forgiveness, the evidence behind tracking and gifted programs, and our old friend, Project Follow Through. This was such a fun conversation to record and edit, so I'll be quiet now and let you listen in to the fantastically insightful Tracing Woodgrains. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with Tracing Woodgrains, which we'll go with Trace, right, for this episode. How are you doing, Trace?
doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
And how about you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us, what you do and a little more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I go by Tracing Woodgrains online, or Trace, which the name's an obvious pseudonym, but I have found it useful to keep my real life identity separate from my online identity, primarily because I just got out of the United States Air Force, where I was working as an airborne cryptologic language analyst. And so that was my day job for the past 6 years or so. I, along with that, recently started working on the podcast Blocked and Reported as what I liked to call the podcaster's apprentice, but which practically speaking was an editorial assistant or production position. They recently accidentally promoted me to chief of staff, so that's what I'm going by now. And so I've been working there for about the past year or so. Other than that, in life, I'm applying towards law school currently, looking eventually to go in an education policy direction. And online, I've written for the past several years about a fairly wide range of topics, primarily really at the core, what I end up getting interested in and returning to again and again are questions around expertise, the cultivation of excellence, the education system more broadly, and internet culture. So that has been a lot of my focus, and that's who I am.
Yeah, and like we've had like a lot of interactions online talking about education. Like you're in the right spot, but we're at the point in my podcast, like 20 episodes into this season, where I wanted to have you on because I listened to Blocked and Reported every time the episode comes out. I've always like wanted to go on the premium episodes, but been like, I have a few, I don't know
Right.
if I should go that route. But I listened to Blocked and Reported, which touches on lots of different topics. I mean, let's start with this question. Since I've been on this podcast, I've mostly been learning from, trial and error. Before we talk about education, as the chief, what did you say you were now?
the shoot, what's my job title again? Hold on. It's a new job title. I'm still getting accustomed to it. Oh yes, chief of staff. That's me. I'm the chief of staff.
That's a promotion from when I first reached out to you. So congratulations.
As Thank you. Yes, it was on the latest episode.
As the chief of staff for Blocked and Reported, which is way more fancy and famous than this little shindig. Can you let me in on the secret of sort of creating a killer podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. The secret to creating a killer podcast is actually incredibly simple. What you do is you find a couple of journalists who are interested in truth, who are smart, who are witty, and who end up coming in contact with each other, having pretty good rapport, pretty good vibe. They, just start creating a lot of really clever things, getting a lot of people paying attention to them. And then what you do is you hop on when it's already successful, and you claim as much credit as you possibly can from that point forward. So that is the secret. I have tried it. It works absolutely flawlessly. And that's what I can recommend. More seriously, I think that the role that I've played in Blocked and Reported, and as much as I've been able to help out with it, has been in terms of looking around for story ideas, doing a lot of background work, doing a lot of episode preparation, taking notes, everything. And what that background process looks like is usually one of us will come up with a topic. In our case, we cover internet nonsense, which is a well that unfortunately never, ever, ever runs dry. And so within that well, usually someone's talking about some nonsense on Twitter or Reddit or one of many other dark corners online, and some mess happens. And what goes on in those situations is you have sort of fractally nested situations where the more you dig into weird, obscure corners of it, the more you find these fights that have been going on for years, these arguments that have just pages and pages of back and forth in obscure forums leading up to one really public blow up that makes everyone else pay attention to them for a moment. And a lot of what I do is going through and trying to track, okay, what exactly aren't people seeing immediately? What exactly are the layers and layers and layers of backstory behind this one immediate blowup? So I'll go through, I'll collect a bunch of links. I'll try to connect as much of the story together as possible, the official reporting that's been done on it, things like that. And working from there, I provide the hosts with the information they have. They usually write up scripts for the episodes where they know this is more or less what we're going to say through it. This is how we're going to present things. This is what we're going to present in the order we present it in, with, a little bit of ad-libbing thrown in here and there as it makes sense. And yeah, that's a lot of it. There's just a lot of background planning of, here's the topic we are covering. We are going to take some time to research a ton of really niche things that may or may not even come up in connection with the topic. Usually I'd say the background research I end up providing is often about 3 or 4 times more than actually makes it into the episode itself. There's a lot of stuff that you learn for context and then can set aside in the actual telling of the story. And then, come on air, and the hour you're on air is sort of the simple part, because at that point, you get to just talk. You get to just relax and hang out and have a good time. And obviously, I very rarely go on air. I went on air once to introduce myself, and we won't talk about the other time. But yeah, that's the core of it from my perspective. Obviously, if you ask the hosts who are actually getting up there and doing all the talking, they'd have a different take. But that's been my experience.
And a lot of the episodes, or I think where the starting point is like a story that everyone just sort of believes to be true, right? It's maybe a breakup that happened, or a violent thing that took place, and everyone immediately, sort of herd mentality, sort of mob mentality, just believes a certain narrative that's being told. And then all of a sudden, there's just, you dig a little bit deeper, you scratch the surface, and you realize like there's either nothing there, or it's absolutely not how the media is portraying it. I mean,
right.
It's almost makes you be uber skeptical of anything you read, just listening to Blocked and Reported for just a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the occupational hazards of my position is that I do end up becoming incredibly skeptical of every publication about everything, whether in official publications, whether on Twitter, whether in other locations, because you realize, and this isn't from Blocked and Reported specifically, but this is from article that I wrote recently. You realize that nobody looks into anything. So, for example, there was this viral story on Twitter recently, semi-recently, a few months ago now, where this man talked about how he was applying for 100 postdoc positions. And he used his, in one set of 100 applications, he used his real name, a Middle Eastern name. In another set of 100 applications, he used a white name. And whereas with his real name, he got no callbacks whatsoever, with the white name, he got, you know, a ton of callbacks, a ton of prospects, a ton of opportunity. And so he writes a thread about this, it goes viral, and a ton of people start talking about this as an indicator of racism in academia. And, you know, it fits a pattern of some research that people have conducted before, some stories people have conducted before. It fits something people want to see to an extent. Like, no one wants to see that there is racism, but feeling that there is racism, they want to see people who can indicate, you know, if there's a problem, they want to be able to highlight that problem. And so it taps into that emotion for people where they don't want to be skeptical about it. But as soon as people started digging into this guy's actual story, a whole bunch of incongruities started popping up. You know, when you're applying to postdoc applications, it's very hard to find 100 in any field. And when you put together a resume for it, you're going to include your list of academic publications, which have your name on them. You're going to have a lot of trackable information. And before people extend offers to them, they're going to do a little bit of due diligence with it, normally speaking. In addition, the real smoking gun was when when people started noticing, hey, this reads almost exactly like a Reddit post that someone else made recently on a related but different topic with a few words changed. And so I ended up on Twitter asking this guy about that Reddit post. And he at first confirmed, yeah, you know, I was inspired by the wording of it. And then he deleted that reply. Then he deleted my tweet, or hid my tweet from his replies. Then he locked his reply thread. Then he deleted his entire thread. Then he locked down his whole account and just basically went into internet hiding. And it was remarkable because like millions and millions of people had seen that. And a few people had called it out as a little bit suspicious, but only at the margins. The vast majority were just nodding along supportively. And it only took a tiny, tiny bit of prodding for this whole structure to fall apart. And there are a lot of things like that. And yeah, the more you see things like that, the more you, you know, do a little bit of prodding and realize just how shoddy one story or another is, it is very hard to trust a lot of things at this point, which is healthy and unhealthy. You need to trust, but and you need to trust someone at some point. But there's just a lot of rubbish online.
And I mean, we're in education. I mean, it's the not so secret thing about education is we wish that, you know, evidence were better, the evidence were stronger. We're not like medicine where you could really run a randomized controlled trial with a huge amount of participants. You do a longitudinal study, really have a good comparison group, et cetera, right? We have a lot of really crummy research. I feel like a lot of that junk is like hiding, like people that kind of trust gurus in our profession based on really bad or non-existent research is like, it's got to be everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's overwhelming. And the thing is, and the really tricky thing is that even the really good researchers, even the ones who take it really seriously and, you know, do the best they can with the data available, everyone has a perspective that they're taking into it and a perspective that ultimately is guiding the outcomes they're reporting and the outcomes they hope to be reporting. Everyone is motivated. And so you can take two researchers, hand them essentially the same data set, and they are going to come to wildly different conclusions about that as far as what makes it into the abstract of their research, what makes it into the actual shorthand, than, you know, than others with different backgrounds. So for example, when I was looking at the question of tracking in schools a while back, there were two really big meta-analyses on it done back in the 80s. And one concluded, yeah, you know, separating out these groups works really well. It has very clear benefits in these situations. It doesn't have harms on the low ends. And the other concluded, yeah, there's not really anything there. And the reason was specifically like their inclusion criteria, which programs they felt met their inclusion criteria, which programs they didn't feel meet their inclusion criteria. They worked from almost exactly the same research base and came away with wildly different conclusions. And this happens all the time in education. Even beyond that, you have situations where data is collected, study information comes out, there's something that feels fairly solid, feels fairly sound, but because it goes against people's instincts, nobody is really motivated to talk about it, nobody is really motivated to pay attention to it, and it just ends up falling in the dust heap of history. The classic example of this is a study back in the 50s called Project Follow Through, which was basically trying to figure out, which of these various curriculum methods leads to the best outcomes for reading and math. And the one that overwhelmingly was the most successful in that is also the one that is least intuitively appealing for most people. It was called direct instruction, capital D, capital I, because you need to distinguish between that and, just regular direct instruction as compared to discovery learning. Anyway, and it was a fully scripted curriculum in which teachers were expected to have whole class call and answer in response to this very tightly scripted lesson plan that allowed for very little deviation in a way that most people really blanch at. And most people end up saying, even if this is effective, we're not sure this is the way we want to teach. And so what happened is study came out, results said, this is wildly more effective than everything else that you tried in this. And then nobody did anything with it ever. And so it's a problem at every level of the pipeline. It's a problem at the data collection. It's a problem at the presentation of the data. And then after the studies are out, it's a problem with dissemination, with getting attention with any of it. So much of it depends on what people want, what people's values are, what their interests are. And so little of it depends on the actual data that everyone ends up fighting over it. And that is difficult and shaky to collect in something like education in the first place. It's thorny.
That's crazy. I mean, and if listeners do not know what Project Follow Through is, or like this is the first time, I do recommend they go back and listen to the episode with Marcy Stein, who is the lead author of Direct Instruction Mathematics. She talks at great length about Project Follow Through. It's exactly that, sort of swept under the rug. I have a few questions for you that you just mentioned. I have to ask these because I'm sure listeners are like, tell me more about this. So I was always told that for tracking, that basically this is what happens. You track kids, and the high kids get to be with higher, kids with higher resources, with more parent investment, higher working memory, higher intelligence, etc. Right? So they get the benefit of being around really highly able peers, where everybody else, especially lower kids, they're put around kids maybe with worse behavior, with worse academic success. And so essentially tracking creates a Matthew effect. It creates a divide between the haves and the have-nots based on how they were raised, how much family investment they had. And so it's deeply inequitable, and it destroys outcomes for lower students. I mean, so when you did that kind of deep dive into the research, what exactly did you find?
Right. So that specific scenario that you outline does happen. And there is a specific case in which it does happen. The case is you take a group of students who you all plan to teach the same material. You split them out and say, all right, you're the fast students, you're the medium students, you're the slow students. We all want to get through the same curriculum, but you're going to get through it when you're paired with the other fast students. You're going to get through it when you're paired with the other medium students. You're going to get through it when you're paired with the other slow students. And the great majority of what meta-analyses that looked at it relied on when they came to that conclusion were studies like that, where there was no curricular adaptation between groups. And when there is no curricular adaptation between groups, that is functionally what you see. You see, a bunch of more engaged students helping more engaged students out. You see a bunch of less engaged students sort of struggling alongside each other. And it's tricky. But the core of effective individualized instruction, tracking, whatever you want to call it, is a really simple idea, which is teaching students only what they do not already know. That is, you want to get students into a position where each student is being exposed to about the same level of challenge for them, about the same level of rigor for them. And that's possible in these systems. You know, if you have gifted programs that provide curricula that isn't just trying to, you know, take them through the same as everyone else, but with smarter people, but is saying, we want to give you instruction specifically tailored to where you're at. The thing is, kids aren't stupid. So when someone is in a classroom and they notice that someone else is always working half as hard and getting twice as far as them, and that's the reality in every mixed classroom. You have some kids who will coast by on very little effort, and some kids who, no matter how much effort they put in, will take longer and will be working harder for the same material. So if you have someone who their whole life is in that situation, and that's what you're asking when you ask someone to be in a mixed classroom with same age students their whole life, what they realize is, or what they internalize is, I am stupid and I cannot learn this subject because this guy over here is just doing it with no effort whatsoever. If you put someone in a situation where they have the opportunity to be learning at a level, at a pace that is suited for them, at a pace where they can follow along and they don't feel like they're always struggling to catch up just as the teacher is moving on, at a pace where the instruction is tailored so that, you know, they get, say, 80 to 90% of things right as they're moving on up the scale, then they never have they don't have that same immediacy of comparison. Obviously, you know, they'll know there are some students who are progressing faster than me in an abstract sense, but they never feel like I am doing something wrong because per the curriculum they're being handed, something that's actually trying to teach them at the pace that they are comfortable learning with and capable of learning with, they never end up feeling I'm the guy who can't do anything. They feel like I am progressing at the pace that is expected for me and things are going well. Similarly with the smarter students, with the students who do pick everything up really quickly, there are two lessons that you can teach them. The first lesson, and this happens in a lot of mixed classrooms, is I don't have to work hard because I know everything. And every classroom I am in, I can just coast, I can just relax, I'm good. And this works really well for the smartest students for a really long time until it stops working. And at the point it stops working, they've built up a tremendous amount of toxic and uncomfortable habits around learning that basically amount to assuming that everything is easy all the time. Nothing, no subject is truly easy if you want to reach the peak of it. No subject, if you want to attain actual expertise, is simple. So when you have a student who you are asking to sit through 12 years or so of education in which everything seems simple to them, it is because they are being asked to work much, much below their own capacity at every stage of that. And the situation that you want is for them to never be the fastest student in the room they're in, and to never have a curriculum for them that is so easy that they learn that they don't have to work. And ultimately, the reality is these students will end up at different levels of aptitude, of achievement in the subject. The reality is that this happens regardless of the system you use. Regardless of whether it's an untracked or a tracked system, students have different aptitudes, students have different interests, students have different places that they want to go with it all. And there is no system on earth that will change those underlying realities. So what you want to do is work towards a system in which students have a chance to work towards their individual strengths, to be pushed at a level around where their current level of aptitude and experience suggests they can work effectively at, and where they have a chance to make it as far, as fast as they show they are capable and willing to go. And that's not necessarily going to be achieved simply by just closing your eyes and saying, here are the fast students, here are the medium students, here are the slow students. It can take individual bespoke solutions for specific individuals. It can take, different curricula, different plans. And it certainly isn't going to happen if you just say, we only want to focus on the smart students and we're going to neglect all the rest. But that is the goal, and that is the reasoning behind individualized or differentiated instruction for students at different aptitude levels. And the research indicates that, in particular with things like gifted programs, where there is differentiated instruction, and in schools that don't just kind of toss the low classes aside and say, we don't care about you students, but who provide them with instructors who care and with curricula that are suited and that are effective at their level, that it ends up being certainly beneficial for the faster students. And the results, the research base tends to be more ambiguous, more inconclusive for students in the other groups, but it does not indicate harm in those groups. And my personal belief is that with thoughtful and tailored instruction to those students as well, it can be a serious benefit for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm in a situation myself. I've been in situations where I feel like the entire school is, for the lack of better words, sort of dumbed down by lower and lower and lower expectations for what students can achieve. Simply, a lot of it's behavior, and a lot of it is a lot of it is just a huge difference between students' achievement levels when they get to secondary. I mean, we're talking about kids who cannot read, 3 or 4 or 5 kids who cannot read, sitting in a classroom with kids who, if given the opportunity, they'd be reading The Hobbit, they'd be reading higher books, but instead they're sitting through grade level books, which are basically being translated to the other kids by the teacher. It's a tough thing because, like you said, what if because of the current system we have, the incentive for teachers would be to go up to those higher classes. I get an easier load. I get paid the same anyway, right? Why not just try to fight every year to get into those sort of it tends to be, I think, the higher classes can be easier in terms of behavior. That's my sense of it. So,
Right.
you're just going to kind of see a gravitation of some of our best teachers who just want to take a break in those higher classes, who just want to stick around in those higher classes, where we get these new inexperienced teachers, maybe even our worst teachers, being passed down to the lower kids.
Right. And one thing I'll say in that regard is that if there is a high level class that ends up feeling like a break, then that's an indication that the teachers and the students have more that they could be doing in that class. That these classes shouldn't be conceived as rewards. They should be conceived as interventions tailored to the needs of the students in them that have high demands and high expectations. And the demands and the expectations should get progressively higher the more the teachers and the students indicate there is potential for those higher demands. In addition, I think it's a mistake at times to conceive of a binary good teacher, bad teacher scale. I think there are a lot of situations in which a teacher is going to be a better teacher for one group of students or for another group of students, depending on their own interests and depending on their own passions. Teachers who work in transitional schools for adults who have severe intellectual disabilities, these are not bad teachers. These are not uncaring teachers, these are not lazy teachers. These are teachers who are devoting an incredible amount of love, time, and attention to some people who have incredibly difficult lives. And here I'm talking about, situations where you have adults who have around the intellectual capacity of 5-year-olds. And those teachers and those institutions are out there doing incredible work. And the students are out there. The interesting thing, you go to one of those institutions and you see some students who, where in a normal classroom, this student would be just kind of, some kid would be seen as the dumb kid, quote unquote, by a lot of the other students, who end up being leaders in their classrooms, who end up being in a position where they are helping the other students, where they are setting an example, a real example for the other students, where they're taking on leadership responsibilities within the school and, doing some really cool things within that, being in a social environment where they are allowed to not be stuck in the social experience of being the dumb kid. Because experiences like that are, in part, socially constructed. Experiences like that are determined by the students around you. If you are asked to be in a room where every student is faster than you at the work, you think of yourself as the dumb kid. If you are in a room where every student is not like that, you don't build the same connections the same way. More than that, so yeah, there is the situation you describe where teachers can recognize, there will be fewer problems with disruption. There will be fewer problems with these things and that. At the same time, teachers are idealists. And nobody I have met in the education field goes in because they think, yes, this is an easy paycheck without any, this is the best way I could possibly make money. They go in because they love children and they want to help children. And you go into any given classroom, any specific classroom, and you don't see teachers spending all of their time with the smartest kids in the classroom, the ones who get it the most. You see teachers go into every individual classroom and spend their time on the kids who aren't quite getting something, who are almost there, who are trying, but who are waiting for something to click to put the pieces together. So given that you see that dynamic in every mixed classroom, where teachers really aren't spending the bulk of their time on the smartest students or on the fastest students or on the ones who always turn their work in on time immediately, my own instinct, and I think this tends to be backed up, is that teachers will not simply gravitate towards the rooms full of those students. Teachers want to help all students. And you want to find a situation where the teacher who is best suited to teach a specific classroom full of kids, who may not be best suited, the teacher who is going to be incredible in an honors class is not necessarily going to be the same teacher who is incredible helping a student patiently going through again and again the same item that feels to the teacher basic, but that for the student is a massive step. These are different skill sets. And so you want to find teachers who are good at teaching to that specific setting versus thinking of it as a good teacher, bad teacher dynamic.
Excellent. I mean, and this all connects to my next question. And I think it was a few years ago. I just kind of did one of those throwaway tweets where it was like, I was in a gifted program. I don't really have a clear opinion on this, but maybe they shouldn't exist, right? And you responded like, wait. And yeah, let me just ask that question because you sort of, implied it, but here it is. Should gifted programs exist?
Absolutely, yes. There are better and there are worse ways to do them. And there are they're not an unalloyed good, but there is no question whatsoever that they should exist. And they shouldn't be conceptualized, and I touched on this a little earlier, they shouldn't be conceptualized as a reward for these kids who are just so capable and so cool and so whatever. They're not that. Kids are kids. What they are are a targeted intervention for kids in need. And for kids who lacking programs like that will go through years and years of school, frustrated, disinterested, learning to have a lot of their passion and excitement stifled. So one way to think of it is that gifted programs, maybe the most important part of their effect isn't for the students who would just be kind of towards the top of a regular class, and would be comfortable with that pace, performing happily in it, although they can do well in those programs. The real strength of a program like that is the kid who gets to school and looks around and thinks, there is nothing here. This is all trivial. This is all dull. This all sucks. And there are students out there who are like that. There are students out there who enter first grade reading at a sixth grade level, doing math at a fourth or fifth grade level, and who look around and who realize there is nothing in this curriculum and no amount of individualized attention from this teacher that can make it a meaningful experience for me. And if you ask someone to sit through year after year of what feels like drudgery like that, where every year most of their learning is going on outside of school, and every year most of their interest is, most of the things that they actually find intellectual interest in come by sneaking a book into class and learning to tune out what the teacher is saying so that they can read their book instead, or things like that. It creates a really damaging dynamic for those kids. And it leads to a lot of cynicism and a lot of really unpleasant and really tragic experiences in school. I know in my own experience in school, I was constantly as a kid fighting to have something faster, something that could engage me, something that could, feed me along. My school didn't have a gifted program until the fifth grade, and I was a nightmare for my teachers in a lot of ways. I remember one teacher actually pulling me out of class, sitting me down, handing me the next test in the unit and saying, this was a history unit or a world geography unit. So I was suddenly being asked to name these countries that I had never looked at, and saying, look, you still need to learn some things, so settle down. But she had to do that because I was just bouncing off the walls, frustrated by an experience where I was constantly hoping for something that would show me I had to work, something that would show me that I didn't just know it all. And I kept running up short in these programs that were tailored towards the median student. And the only really happy school year that I had, K through 12, there was only one, came in 8th grade. And it came after I had dropped out of a regular school entirely, after going through gifted program and thinking, this still isn't quite what I'm looking for. After going to online school and rushing through 2 years of this online school's curriculum in 1 year. I was in 6th grade. I rushed through their 7th and 8th grade curriculum. I was like, this is awesome. I can go at my own pace. This is great. I'm finally able to do something. After that, after I skipped a grade and returned back and had went into, the honors 8th grade classes after this big leap, and suddenly I had something to prove. I was struggling, I was learning, I was younger than the other students. I was in a position where I was not the fastest one in the room to get all the concepts in the room. And I was like, holy cow, this is what people have been getting from education this whole time. That was the first and only really time I felt like that in school. And I did great in school that year. I did great socially. I had a great time academically. And it was really transformative for me. That, alongside having things like math club outside school that were suddenly exposing me to competition math and to things that were wildly interesting and wildly creative, far beyond what I had imagined were available and could be available in my regular classes. Things like that just opened a whole new world of excitement and interest to me that weren't feasible, wouldn't be appropriate in a regular classroom because they were at a speed and level of depth and so forth that most students are not interested in and are not necessarily going to be ready for. And you know, that's the reality for a lot of kids out there, is that they're going through these classes, learning not to care about school because no one is interested in pushing them.
Yeah, it's, when you put it that way, right? Like, what was I thinking, right? I mean, one solution I've seen in my career to this issue, and it's one I do not think works at all, but I'll describe it to you and I want to hear your take,
Yeah.
which is instead of basically either promoting the student or giving them a specialized program like a gifted program, or giving them after school resources and things like that, or doing all of them, instead of doing that, what we should do is create sort of a Rousseauian, Deweyan utopia in which the entire school is like an open air library museum thing. And so then the high kids will go and find what works for them and through their own ambition. The lower kids will be, working with people at their pace, and it will all just sort of work out. And this was in a private school, and the kids were more or less well behaved. The result was, as you'd imagine, it was chaos. The lowest kids were basically, abused by some of their more higher powered peers, and it was just a nightmare. I want to. Why don't we do school like that? Now that
I, yeah. All right. I'm going to say, something a little bit controversial, and maybe I'll walk it back a little bit later. Who knows? Screw Rousseau and screw Dewey. Very bluntly, the reality is that everyone in every subject, more or less, is going to do better when they have coaches, when they have mentors, when they have guides, making it so that they don't need to reinvent the wheel for themselves, making it so that they aren't held captive to their own interests and their own understanding. And that's what you're asking people to be, really, when you're putting them in a idealized Rousseauian environment. You're telling them, you can never rise higher than your own default level of interest and default level of motivation. They are saying that, if you get started on something and then you realize you're distractible, you realize, say, you get started learning math, but then something gets hard and you realize, hey, Pokemon's a lot of fun. Minecraft is a lot of fun. And let me tell you, there are no kids who are so smart and so academic and so talented that they look at, video games or YouTube and can't get sucked into just endless waves of dreck. And you're telling those kids, it's fine. We do not want you to have any higher ambition than yourself, than what you at 6 or 7 or 8 years old summons out of your own soul. You want and you need guide rails for people. That is, you want, and this applies really to adults as much as to children. So I'll use an example of adults before jumping back to all this, which is, say, if someone wants to learn a language and they have a real, sincere, long-term interest in learning that language, someone who goes to a language school, say someone who takes a path like I did, where they join the military and they go to a school that sits them down and says, you are going to study this language for 6 hours every day, and you're going to have speakers who are fluent in or teachers who are fluent in the language, teaching you moment by moment with it. And you are going to be speaking the language with them, and you are going to have daily work that is checked and that is examined. Are you doing it? And you are going to have very clear expectations. Someone who says, I want to learn Chinese, and then does that, is going to be indescribably better at Chinese by the end of a year, 2 years, 3 years, than someone who says, I want to learn Chinese, downloads Duolingo, and does it when they feel like it. And that's no knock on downloading Duolingo and, dabbling in interests. What it is a recognition that scaffolding helps, that mentors help, that systems that expect something out of you, and that not only expect something out of you, but show you a way upward that doesn't rely on your own ingenuity. They provide real serious impacts for people. And it is not a service for people to tell them, we are going to take that all away from you and let you make it on your own. Yeah, that's the reality. That if you want to reach the top of anything, if you want to become truly capable in any domain, then you need a lot of restrictions on the way to the top of that domain. You need discipline, you need serious rigor, and you need things that are going to be beyond your own individual willpower, your own individual capacity to do. And I'm not saying, to be clear with this, that we should tell everyone you must become an expert in a domain. We are going to sit you down in a straitjacket and make sure that you do everything possible. What I am saying is that we need the option for people to do things like this. And the option doesn't come by sticking a kid in a library and hoping that they walk out the next, who was that brilliant mathematician, Ramanujan? I'm going to butcher his name, but walk out the next von Neumann. Like, it doesn't happen like that.
Oh, I wish I could have condensed that whole thing into like a bite-sized piece, because I think that's the entire point of this podcast in one beautiful rant. I really appreciate that. Let's go to the next question, the next kind of main question, which I do wonder if you got a lot of pushback on this. I do wonder if this was your big viral post of the season, but right, the Biden administration comes out with a plan, a very almost surprise plan, it seemed like, to relieve a certain amount of student debt. And you wrote a post that I thought encapsulated a lot of my thoughts on this, but that I wasn't able to articulate. My wife, who will be listening to this, doesn't agree with me or you on this at all. So here's the question. Should we be forgiving student debt, and should we have done what just happened with the Biden administration?
Right. To answer that question, what I'll start with is an encapsulation of my philosophy in terms of higher education, which is that the primary beneficiary of it should be the primary individual responsible for it. That is, that a student who is taking the opportunity to pursue something that will give them an leg up economically over the course of their lives, but that is something that not everyone and not every job needs or should need, should be the primary individual ultimately responsible for that. And that has much deeper implications than just the question of student loans. It has implications as to whether parents should be expected to subsidize or be almost commanded by these universities to subsidize their adult kids' education. It has implications for income-based repayment, things like that. But that's the core of it. Now, that's where I think we should be. That's not where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is a really kludgy, really nasty system for a lot of people involved, that sees a lot of people make a lot of really difficult decisions based on the reality that university cost is spiraling, that there are all sorts of inefficiencies being built in, so forth, where some people look around and they say, I can handle this. I can take loans, I can make it through, and I will be better off for it. And there are some who look at it and say, look, I value not going into debt. I value maintaining really firm control over my financial future. I value all of these things. And this is the decision that most young, educated 18 or 19-year-olds are being asked to make at this point. So what happens, once someone has made that decision, is that they make commitments based on that decision. What student loan forgiveness is saying to a huge amount of people is, we see the decisions you have made. We see the life path you have taken as a result. We notice that you have forgone certain opportunities and gained certain rewards as a result of that life path. So for someone who avoids student debt, does something like I did, join the military, or just starts working, things like that, their reward is immediate financial security. Their reward is more immediate stability, things like that. But their cost is they forego the college experience of their dreams. A lot of these students want to go to, say, an Ivy League school and get a PhD and do all of these things. They want to enter that academic pathway. But they take a trade-off. They look at it and say, I'm not going to do that. Versus a student who their cost is they have student loans. Their benefit is they had an incredible college experience and got a degree. Now, there are other people outside of these categories, and I'm not immediately going to speak to all of those cases. But blanket student loan forgiveness isn't targeting only people who were screwed over by for-profit colleges or only people who were in a really desperate position. It is targeting specifically that class of people who I am talking about, people who did gain really massive material advantages from their degrees, who gained incredible experiences from it, and who have been put on a pathway to be this generation's ascendant upper middle class. What universal student loan forgiveness is doing is saying, well, universal is a misnomer because it's not universal. It is saying everyone who made a decision not to take out student loans for whatever reason, or to work and to save to pay those loans off for it, whatever reason, is going to subsidize the education of everyone who did not make that decision. They are going to, and people can say, oh, we'll raise taxes on the rich to pay for this. We'll raise taxes on this group or another to pay for this. There's only so far that something like that goes. Tax money ultimately is tax money. Government money is government money. It goes to one purpose or it goes to another purpose. It is not limitless. It is not endless. By focusing on one priority, you are, no matter what that priority is, you are focusing away from other priorities. So it functionally is telling everyone who does not benefit that they will subsidize everyone who does benefit from this. And the reality of student loan forgiveness is that most people still do not have bachelor's degrees. Most people still do not have student loans. Most people do not put themselves on this ramp. And they are being told, you will subsidize the people who did, many of whom are already wealthier than you, many of whom are going to be wealthier than you, many of whom are in a position to be the social elite, to be the not even necessarily social elite, to be the upper middle class, to be in good positions. It is your responsibility to pay the cost of their education. And not only that, we are changing an agreement that both of you already made and both of you already understood. We are turning that around and retroactively saying, now that you've paid this cost, now that you both have paid these costs and you both have accrued these benefits, we're going to flip that around and give this benefit to these people who already received a great deal of benefits that you chose to forgo in order to get this benefit. And that is a recipe for a loss of social trust, a loss of social cohesion. It is a recipe for a much less healthy society, but by taking measures like that. So that's the core of why, instead of things like student loan forgiveness, what I adamantly push for is things like an Australia-style income-based repayment system, things that put the primary cost on the primary beneficiary while also avoiding the catastrophic outcomes of someone who pays this cost and then realizes there was no pot of gold at the end of their rainbow. I think you can look for solutions, and you can look for compassionate solutions that do not create such a fundamentally unjust outcome for people.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like your situation was similar to mine. Like what I did was I did this calculus, right? I could have gone to the University of Washington, which is where I eventually went, but I have a community college nearby. Everybody told me, right? You can save a lot of money by going to community college. Of course, there's no dorms, there's no student life, there's none of that, but I made that choice and I spent my first years there. But then the whole time I wasn't hanging out when I got to the University of Washington. I didn't go to Greek Row. I didn't enjoy any of the college dorm life. I lived at a dude's house who was a friend of my dad's so that I wouldn't have to pay for housing in Seattle, which is very expensive. And I worked at Pagliacci Pizza like 20, 25 hours a week, right? I tried to rush through my bachelor's degree as fast as I could because I knew if I just mess this up, I'm going to have thousands and thousands more dollars that I'm going to have to repay someday. So I did it exactly in 4 years, even kind of doing a bachelor's degree that I probably wouldn't have chosen, I think, if I had given myself some time to explore. And so on, right? I leave college with very little debt, and my parents didn't have to pay a lot. They, you know, I believe it was about my mom helped me out about $1,000 a quarter. But all of this was like this big family decision. I'm sure I would have made a lot of different choices that ultimately would have been a lot more expensive had I just been expecting a bailout after all of this. And I feel bad even saying all this because it's like, oh, poor you. I'm well off now. I've had a great life. But my wife would just say, the world's not fair, but there's an element of fairness, and there's an element of sort of like you said, retroactively changing the agreement after I made all of these decisions.
Right. The world is fundamentally not fair, but that doesn't excuse actively going in to make sure that the world is just that much less fair. The world's not fair only goes so far. And, you know, this all really came home to me. I'm still in undergrad, technically. I have a couple of online classes that I need to knock out before I move on. Joining the military will do that for you. Taking that detour in life will do that for you. And so I had the opportunity, while this policy was being actively discussed, to see that I was eligible for thousands of dollars of student loan money that I knew that I did not need. And I knew that there was a chance that I could take that loan money and have it all paid off for me and get a free $8,000 that I did not need from the government. I didn't take that. A lot of people, would tell me, take the money and run. What are you doing? Sure, even if you think it's an unfair policy, just go for it. There's perhaps something to that, but I didn't feel right grabbing this money that I didn't need. But a policy that invites people to ask that question and ask, should I loot from the common coffer despite not needing any of it, despite being in a decent spot, it's a bad policy. And a policy that puts someone like me in a position like that, I don't like it, and I won't like it.
I wonder too if this gets, like you said, your philosophy about who should pay, but there's also the philosophy on what the college experience is supposed to be, and it's become so mutated and perverse in some ways, I feel,
Yes.
where it's this big rich people's like playground where we get to kind of mess around for the next few years on daddy's money, and everybody else who doesn't have that money has got to sort of just take the loans and come and participate. It's not become about what you'd think it is, going to college, being in beautiful libraries and reading really excellent books and rubbing elbows with professors. It's been about frat life and dorm life and alcoholism and a whole bunch of other things.
Right. And the further people get from having to internalize the cost themselves, and large loans that you are absolutely guaranteed, uh, and that you know that the government will step in eventually somehow for do this. The further people get divorced from the actual cost of it, the more that underlying cost can spiral, and the more the incentives align such that college can become more like that, where colleges can compete on amenities. Colleges can compete on showing students, here's how awesome of a time you can have while you're here. Here's our food court that has really fantastic food for you that you're going to, yes, you're going to pay out the nose for this food. And if you were in a feeling in a financially difficult position, you would never choose to eat like this every day. But you'll have all of this, and you'll have these extraordinary things. And so the most urgent thing I see with regard to universities is looking at this incredible cost spiral that they've been undergoing in all areas, adding unimaginable levels of administrative overload, massively increasing, administration costs, massively increasing overall costs. And what you want to do is cut that cost off at the root, is look for alternatives, is look for ways to take it back towards more of the experience you're describing, more of this, student rubbing shoulders with professors, the core of a university experience, the core of an experience focused on learning. The problem with student loans, anything in that spiral, it just feeds into that cost spiral where then universities know no matter how much they charge, ultimately someone's going to come in and pay that bill for them. Ultimately, someone is going to validate this decision to keep ramping up tuition costs, to keep ramping up amenities, to keep ramping up this whole unsustainable, possibly. We're a wealthy society, so it might be sustainable for quite some time, but at some point you have to pay the piper. If there's an incentive to keep ramping this whole thing up, and forgiving student loans is very directly an incentive for this whole system to say, this works. We are essential, and so no matter how much our costs spiral, someone else will pay for it eventually. The more you incentivize that, the more that spiral just keeps happening. And what we really desperately need is something that can cut that spiral off at the roots and address the issues at the roots, rather than further diffusing the costs and further pushing the costs onto people who are distant from the moment. It's just a terrible misalignment of incentives all around that leads to the problems that have been getting worse to continue getting worse.
I feel like, I feel like I'm the person who's like wanting college to be boring, or I want schools to be boring. I mean, we just talked about it. It's like, yeah, let's put scripted direct instruction, manuals in every teacher's hands, and let's get rid of all the these crazy frat parties and things. But honestly, like maybe that to me is kind of where I'm leaning in terms of education. Something that's pretty boring, but it's something that over time you're accessing really cool, interesting ideas, and that's the meat, right? As opposed to
Yes.
all of these desserts that have nothing to do with the core mission of education.
Yes, there's a quick analogy that I like to use when thinking about the core mission of things like education, and it is the idea of a wood carver. You take someone like me, I'm not a wood carver. I haven't done it, haven't practiced it. You give me a block of wood, you give me a knife, I have very little that I can do with that block of wood and that knife. I can whittle it down a little bit. I can maybe carve a little smiley face into it. I am not very free when it comes to that block of wood and that knife. You put that same block of wood and that same knife in the hands of an expert wood carver who has been doing it their whole life, and it is almost magical the things they can do with that. And any of us looking at that wood carver can't help but think in a corner of our minds, what if I could do that? What if I could be like that? But the reality is, for anyone to become anywhere like that takes a great deal of rigor, a great deal of discipline, a great deal of effort along the way, and a great deal that doesn't read as characteristically fun. There are moments of joy on the path. There are always moments of joy and excitement. The process of learning things is inherently exciting. The process of progressing is inherently exciting. If someone sees themselves making real progress on problems that have been difficult to them, they cannot help but have some sense of excitement and some sense of wonder connected with that. But there is also a lot of rigor and a lot of seriousness and a lot of difficulty that comes with it. And the task of education should be seen not as sticking a block and a knife in everyone's hands and saying, go wild, you're free to do whatever you want with this, but to put however many want to do it, however many are interested in that final outcome of being a master wood carver, to put them on a path where no matter whether they are deeply talented initially, no matter whether they are deeply focused initially and capable of, on their own, sitting down and doing hours and hours of hard work, that they can come as close as it is possible for them to come to goals like that. That is the mission of education. And that mission fundamentally requires rigor, requires restriction, requires serious sacrifice on all ends. And if you have a system that's trying not to do things like that, you have a system that's routing around the actual process required to gain expertise.
Beautiful. Really, that really is. I really do appreciate, all of your commentary. I'm going to continue to listen to Blocked and Reported, but knowing that you're tracing Woodgrains is in the background, influencing the whole process of this. Well, let's go ahead and end here. What is next for you, and where can listeners go to find your work?
Yeah, so next for me in terms of my regular life, I'm currently applying to law schools. I'll be living in Philadelphia shortly and attending, presumably, one of the law schools there, and looking to focus on that on my day job. But honestly, very little of that leaks into my online commentary and my online experience. Where people can find me and where I am perhaps far more of my life than is healthy is on Twitter at Trace Woodgrains, on Substack, tracingwoodgrains.substack.com, at Reddit, a subreddit called, I call it Theshism or the Schism, THESCHISM, and just, on Blocked and Reported and just generally looking around online, shaking my fist at clouds when it comes to things like education. And so, I'm a writer. I look at things, I write. I have altogether far stronger opinions than is probably healthy, and I will continue to have altogether far stronger opinions than is probably healthy about a fairly wide range of topics. And I try to expose as much of my thought process as I can and run through my wrestling with a bunch of these questions on my Substack and my online writing in general and in my conversations. So that's where people can find me.
Well, thank you so much, Trace. This has been another episode of Progressively Incorrect. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Trace, I will see you online.
Absolutely. Thanks heaps. It's been a blast.